James Wade sort of has been the opportunist who's cashed in on all those opportunities that have came along, and I think it's been publicised as such. James Wade will probably, in reflection, wish he handled that very, very differently.
He's been a big advocate, ambassador for Bipolar UK, so that's another heavy layer to have to manage. And welcome to the story of James Wade, the latest player to feature in this series here on the MODUS Super Series darts channel on Pluto TV. And to talk about the glittering career of one of the greats of the game, Matthew Edgar has joined me. He is one of those names in darts. Well, there's going to be plenty to talk about, isn't there?
Yeah, he's one of the most successful players in PDC history, certainly in regards to major winning titles. Maybe doesn't get the credit he deserves purely on the fact that he hasn't got a world championship. And we say that yet because he's always looking liable.
Yeah, loads of semi-final heartbreak as well, one in particular that we'll probably come on to in this chat. But he's a player whose career has spanned more than 2 decades now, early days in the early 2000s, playing some BDO stuff. And he was one of those players, and it seems much more common now, but then it was unheard of, really, wasn't it, for a young player, even in their early 20s, to emerge straight away and start winning things.
It really was. I remember any time a player first sort of got into the World Championships around that sort of time, it was a lot of discussions about even things like having to consider where to walk, because the cameras are all to the left, you have to exit to the right, extra things like that to have to consider that you didn't have to consider until you got to an event like that, because there wasn't streaming platforms then. There wasn't broadcasted events like we've got here at the Super Series, where players get the opportunity to play in that environment. So it was quite a big thrusting into a completely different world of broadcast, where nowadays you can sort of build up to that sort of platform, and we see the benefits of that, especially with things like Euro Tours as well now. There's so many examples I could pull upon where now when players get to the World Championship, we see the best of them from their very first darts.
He had a couple of appearances at Lakeside before moving over to the PDC. If anyone has a chance to look back on YouTube at his walk-ons, etc., he was kind of a very different character then, wasn't he, than the one we know now?
Oh, definitely. He's changed and evolved quite a lot. And, I mean, even the nickname was it 009, wasn't it, before?
There's been a few, yeah.
Yeah, he's one of those that's had a few cringy ones over the years before he's settled on where he is. But, yeah, his demeanour's changed quite a lot. We know why that is. I'm sure we'll get into that as the sort of segment goes on. But when we look at sort of him as a younger, he was quite bubbly, wasn't he? He was quite bouncy, where now, and the thing is, maybe one of the things I don't quite get with James is, like, he likes the celebration, and when he goes that way and when he puts that into place and when he's enjoying the moment, we tend to find the best darts from him. But he can get into that mode where it's almost like he takes offence to if someone celebrates, and then by turn he does the total opposite, and he'll be so mute, and he'll go mute for a few months, and that's not where he plays his best darts.
Yeah, look, is he one of the first players, apart from those couple of Lakeside appearances, that really has pretty much been PDC throughout their career?
Yeah, and I think that's the way that darts is going now. He was one of the first. A lot of people had to come through what was then the system. You played in your pub, your Super League, your county. You either got selected for England or you went and did the tour. Once you've done the tour, you've been on it for a while, then you go, right, maybe I'll jump over to the PDC because that's where the money is. Where nowadays with the development tour, the challenge tour, we're starting to see people sort of bypass what is now the WDF circuit. We see the top players on the challenge tour not even entertain the WDF circuit anymore, and they're sort of pushing to try and get into those 128 places. And I think that's now the modern way of doing it, but certainly wasn't when James was around. Lakeside had an awful lot of relevance back then.
Yeah, 2003 he made his PDC debut in the UK Open. Around that time, there was a certain player who was winning everything and would continue to win most things for the next decade. James Wade is never really one of those players who's talked about as a rival to Phil Taylor. But there was a time when Phil didn't win, it seemed to be James Wade that won.
That's very true. Maybe something I didn't even think about before, actually, as well, in regards to, because around that time it was sort of John Part, wasn't it, that people put down as a rival. We had Dennis Priestley before that, and you can go through Barneveld, and you can go through the people that were sort of in these head-to-head battles up to Gary Anderson, Michael van Gerwen. And James Wade, like I say, never really considered. And I think that's kind of the way that James Wade's publicised and headlined as well. Even nowadays, when you talk about James Wade, it tends to be in that sense of the expression of doing a James Wade. You know what that means. It means he's ground something out. It means he's took advantage of a situation, the opportunist. But yeah, never really regarded, and a question that comes up quite a lot: who is the most underappreciated dart player? I don't like the term underrated. I think underrated's a terrible statement because you've got orders of merit, you've got rankings, you've got all the different things to judge that. And I used to say Stephen Bunting. Last night I looked at it and thought maybe Brendan Dolan. I think I might have to change to James Wade, because the more that we're talking about this, the more that you realise just what he has done and the position he's been in within the sport that maybe he doesn't get the credit for.
Yeah, well, let's talk about those sort of immediate glory years, because within 3 or 4 years of joining the PDC, he was winning titles, not just Pro Tours, but major titles.
Many of them as well, wasn't it? And a selection of them. I mean, the World Match Play, what a title to win, and to do it multiple times and play multiple finals. The UK Open, for me, is the hardest tournament on the calendar to win. And that comes down to the scheduling, the random draw. You don't know when you're going to be on. There was a story I talk about quite regular. I was on at 7 o'clock, but the draw was done at 6 o'clock. So I only found out at 6:15 that I was playing in the evening session at 7 o'clock. I could have been on at 7, I could have been on at 11. You don't know. So you've got a 45-minute window to prepare, but you could have had 4 hours and 45 minutes. You just don't know. And that makes that tournament very, very hard to play in multiple rooms and all around the place. So the fact James Wade's won that on multiple occasions just tells you that the quality he's got over that sort of consistent base.
Yeah, and in 07 he won 2 of the toughest tournaments with the best fields. He won the World Match Play and the World Grand Prix that year. Is that the moment that really everybody in darts was standing up thinking, this guy's the real deal and could potentially be someone to threaten Taylor's dominance?
Yeah, and when you look at sort of like the odds compilers, what they thought of James Wade going into the World Championship, he was always sort of top 5, at a push top 10 in regards to the favourites to go on to win that title. That's because he won the others. And like I say, the tricky ones, the World Grand Prix, double start, double finish it, and 9 darter in that tournament. One of only 3 players to do so ever in the history of that double start event. UK Open, the match play, which traditionally is probably the strongest field of the year, certainly nowadays. You get the top 16 players over the 2-year order of merit, you get the top 16 over the 1 year. So essentially we've got the best 16 players in the world against the best in-form players in the world, and you put them head to head. And to win that as well, and to get to the final multiple occasions, and we're not casting our mind back many years. Just last year, James Wade made it to the semi-final. So it just shows, like, yes, he's got longevity, but he's also got longevity dining at the very top table.
Yeah, and just to go back to that sort of story between him and Phil Taylor, it is the reason that he's not regarded a rival, precisely because of the point you made earlier about him being an opportunist. He would win tournaments when somebody else had knocked Phil Taylor out.
Yeah, and as a player, you always say certain things, but you don't mean them. And there's a lot of times you'll say, like, well, if I'm going to win the tournament, I want to beat Phil Taylor in the final. Then it became Van Gerwen in the final. Or I want to beat them on the way, so that conversations like this don't exist. But realistically, you want them out. You know, you want them to lose to the lowest ranked player in the event, who then goes up and has played their final. I mean, how many times we see someone beat Phil Taylor and then go out in the next round? That's what you want. You want someone to beat that guy, and then you play him who's played his final already, and you want a nice, easy passage. There's always this thing, and it's one of the classic ones when you shake someone's hand beforehand and they say all the best. And you think, you don't want my best. Like, you want me to play terrible. It's one of those sort of backhanded comments. And with that, I think that sort of goes in with that comment. And James Wade sort of has been the opportunist who's cashed in on all those opportunities that have came along. And I think it's been publicised as such. You know, I will say that I think some people nowadays are a little bit lazy, and they'll just go with either the headline or they won't look any further. How many times do you see people, certainly in the comments on like a Facebook post, where they put the headline in, they don't read the article, and they made their opinion based on the headline? With you headline James Wade as the opportunist, people won't look any deeper than that. And I think that's kind of now where his sort of career and his legacy is going to be.
But there's one tournament where he hasn't tasted success yet. That's the World Championship. I say hasn't tasted success by that I mean he hasn't won it, but he has been in the semi-finals 4 times. First of all, let's talk about the big question: is he the best player never to have won that tournament? And then maybe a reflection on some of those semi-finals and why he's not been able to take that next step.
I think when you look at, is he the best player to not win that championship, your mind instantly starts to go to who you can rival it with. And you start to go to certain people and you go, well, Terry Jenkins, Dave Chisnell. You start to name potential people who have sort of got close. And then you stop and you think, it's not even close. It's not even a conversation. James Wade is the best player who's not won the World Championship based on the major titles he's won, the longevity, the quality. And when we look at the longevity, it's not just the fact that he's been in darts for a long period of time, playing in majors. He's always been around the world's top 16, and for a long period of time. And you don't get that. We've got a couple of people who we can call upon for longevity in certain positions, but not in the top 16. That's very, very rare. So, best player not to win a World Championship? Absolutely.
The one that always sticks in the mind was the Adrian Lewis match in the 2012 World Championship when he led 5-1, actually only had one double to win. A lot of people forget how good Adrian Lewis was in the comeback, but there was all sorts of other drama going on that day. Is that the one that really got away, bearing in mind that Lewis then went on to beat Andy Hamilton with respect in the final?
Absolutely. And I think if James Wade could relive that moment, it would go very differently. I mean, yes, we had the Wingate. It's one of the most famous incidences in the World Championship, certainly in the semi-finals. And when I watched that, it still makes me laugh now. Like when they stood there, like trying to get the shirts to blow, like as if it was like a gale going across the stage. But James Wade will probably, in reflection, wish he handled that very, very differently. Sometimes when something's bugging your opponent, let it bug them. Especially in the World Championship semi-final. Everyone wants to be the nice guy. Sometimes you can't be. Sometimes you have to do silly things. There's one classic case I remember. I was walking around with my shoelace undone. And player I'm playing, because your shoelace is undone. And it's like, okay. Next minute, your shoelace is undone. Next minute, you're going to trip over it now. And the whole time he was bothered about my shoelace. And after the game, he goes, why didn't you do your shoelace up? I was like, well, because every moment you was bothered about my shoelace, you weren't thinking about the game. So I ended up winning the match. And I think James Wade probably bought into it a bit too much from Adrian Lewis's perspective and not from his own. And ideally, he should have just been like, no, that's fine. We'll carry on.
And he's had other beef with Adrian Lewis and a few other controversial moments in darts. He said some controversial things as well. At Premier League, there was a loose floorboard that all got really dramatic, didn't it, between the pair of them? And some stuff on the Ali Pali stage where he's giving it large. You mentioned before that you maybe see the best of him when he's celebrating. He's a complicated and often controversial figure, isn't he?
He is, and it is a hard one to sort of really understand. The only way I can sort of see it is just from a performance perspective, and I see that he plays better when he's got that fire in the belly. Certainly when he's been written off, it bugs him. That run he had at the World Match Play last year, if you remember the interviews, he had a lot to say about people, and it sort of fired him on and spurred him on. And that's when you get the best of James Wade. I don't think it suits him when he's trying to control things too much. And no one does. If it's naturally you, just be that. Just own what you are. And if you are a naturally bubbly person, be a naturally bubbly person. And if you want to give it some, give it some. Like, everyone understands in the world of sport that, yes, it might be in the moment, and then as soon as you're off, it's like the old football analogy, isn't it? As soon as you walk off the pitch, it's all forgotten and everything's left there. And darts is very similar with that. You know, any fallouts I've ever seen or been involved in the world of darts last no longer than 24 hours before it's all resolved, because the world's too small in the darting world, certainly on the Pro Tour with the 128 touring players. So I think James sometimes just needs to be who he is and go back to that guy that you did see at Lakeside. Yeah,
and something that he has been very open about in more recent years was his diagnosis of bipolar and ADHD. I think there was a famous match at the World Grand Prix with Colin Osborne where that really manifested on the stage and he just didn't want to be there. You could see that, looked really lost, ended up checking into rehab after that tournament and getting that diagnosis. And he's been a big advocate, ambassador for Bipolar UK. So that's another heavy layer to have to manage with all the other demands of being not just a dart player, but a dart player for most of his career in the top 10, top 5, and contending for major titles.
Yeah, and that's why it's such a hard case to try and analyse and try and debate, because there's external factors that I just do not understand. I don't understand the dynamics of bipolar. I don't understand sort of the lifestyle. And I think what he's done is he's tried to bring that to the forefront a little bit, try and make some awareness. I mean, when we look at where the best awareness comes from, it comes from programmes. And it's maybe something we haven't really had in sport too often. You know, ironically, it's going to sound really silly, but I've learnt a lot of things from Coronation Street, because they like to bring things to awareness, and they use storylines within the show where entertainment purposes, where they can sort of bring an issue to the forefront. And I know not too long ago they did one on sepsis, and I was like, I've never heard of sepsis, but what's that? And I understand what it is, and I learned about it, and I researched it. It's like, oh, right, now. And it was all from that program that did that. How many people have had that same experience through James Wade? And maybe we don't even understand the impact that he's had, because I'm sure, like me watching Coronation Street and learning about those things, there was many other people that did and are following his story and journey as well.
Yeah, and sport is a powerful tool, so it's great that he's done that. Look, you mentioned he gets a bit between his teeth when he's written off, so I'm going to ask you a question now where you get the chance to write him off or not. Do you think that he can still go on and be a world champion? Because he certainly thinks and believes that he can.
If he believes he can, he can. You know, that's one thing with sport, and darts especially, a solo sport, that there's only one person who needs to believe it, and that's yourself. If you think about the actual logic behind things, it's almost an impossibility, a mathematical impossibility to even be a professional dart player. Think about how many people are in the world, how many people play this sport, and how many people are really professionals. We've got no more than 100 professionals in the entire world. So the likelihood of being one of those professional players, but yet how many people believe they're going to be it? We have players come here every single week who believe they're going to be it here at the Super Series. We've got the Challenge Tour full of players that are going to believe they are, the Development Tour, the JDC. There's systems out there full of players who believe they're going to be that. And before that, there was about 10, 16, 32. Only recent times we can say maybe 100. So... And we still had thousands upon thousands of people taking part in this sport, thousands of people turning up to Opens around the world because they believed, despite what anybody else thought. I've been on that journey. At one point, I was probably the only person who believed I could do it, but that's all it needed to be. And the fact that James Wade believes it can be him, that's all it needs to be. And if he thinks he can do it, he can.
11 major titles, it's a huge haul, isn't it? When people talk about the greats of the game, it's often Phil Taylor, Eric Bristow, perhaps Raymond van Barneveld, nowadays Luke Littler already. Where does James Wade sit in all of that?
Do you know what? I don't think I've ever seen anyone put a top 5 together that's involved James Wade. But I don't think on the same side I've ever seen anyone do a top 10 that doesn't involve him. So I think that probably tells you where it is. I like watching those, like the top 5 players of all time, the top 10 players of all time. The top 5 tends to be the same 5, just in different orders, depending on what people think. But whenever the 10 comes, I think James Wade always hits around the 9 or 10 mark for most people's list. And for me, the same. I don't think you can have a top 10 players of all time without James Wade included.
I'm going to ask you about the future now, but for James Wade, is the past the best indicator of the future? Because he's somebody who's kind of always done the same thing and kind of always got the same results.
It's a tricky one, because I thought a year ago maybe James Wade's best was in the past. If we cast our mind back to the start of 2024, into the middle of 2024, he wasn't in the World Match Play. But I also think that helped him, because there's an element where James Wade would get his calendar at the start of the year, and you'll go through it and you'll mark off. You'll go, right, that's match play week, that's the World's there, that's the Grand Prix. And he'll mark it off because that's what he's done for most of his adult life. He's always marked off the match play week because he's always been in it. And then all of a sudden you get close to the match play and it's like, I might not actually be in the match play. And all of a sudden it's like, well, what do I do with that week? I'm going to miss out. And with that, it gave him a bit of a kick, I think. And when you look at the performances he put in at the back end of last year, the semi-final at the match play, the good runs on the Pro Tour, he stepped it up. And I think every time, to have that longevity, every time your back's up against the wall, you come out swinging. And he certainly did come out swinging. And right now, I think you'd be very, very brave to suggest James Wade doesn't win something else. He's got a long time still in this game.
Certainly has. Thanks, Matt, for your time today. James Wade, yeah, a long time in the game already. Plenty more to come. We wonder what is next for Wade. Do stay tuned here on Pluto TV for plenty more Tungsten Talks, the story of documentaries, and of course, our live action from the MODUS Super Series.